Hey, it's Stuart. I've got a question about residential versus commercial property, and it's from Corey, and I'll just read out his question to you, and then I'll have a go at answering it. Corey writes, my wife and I have $450,000 owing on our house, and the bank values it at $800,000. Not enough savings for a deposit for an investment property, so we'd need to draw from equity. Doing some research and numbers, it looks like that if we bought a residential property worth around 700,000, it'd be costing us quite a bit each week. If we could purchase a commercial property for the same amount, it would return a net $15,000 per year in terms of income. What are your thoughts on commercial properties building wealth? And is there something that I'm missing? So Corey, it's a really good question. And obviously, when we invest in commercial property or if we own a commercial property, the biggest difference between commercial and residential is that the commercial tenant pays for most of the outgoings. So the costs associated with that particular property. The only thing you might have to pay for is some land tax with commercial property, and there might be some small other things in terms of compliance matters. But apart from that, the tenant will pay for all the outgoings, and that means the rent that they pay you can go directly towards servicing debt or putting money in your pocket. And of course, therefore, commercial properties do yield better returns from an income perspective. But it's really important, Corey, to look at the overall return and then the makeup of that overall return. The reason that investing in residential property works very well if you're able to buy the right asset and hold it for many decades is that it will give you more in capital growth than it will in income. And whilst that doesn't necessarily look attractive today, because as you correctly highlighted, if I go and buy a residential property, it's probably going to take money out of my pocket. Well, it definitely will. And where interest rate settings are at the moment, those holding costs are quite considerable. And that's true. Now, hopefully, you'll get compensated by capital growth. Now, it's not going to happen every year. It's not going to be on a straight line basis. But, if I buy a $700,000 property today and I get 7.2% compounding growth over the long term, well, in 10 years, that property will be worth 1.4. In 20 years, it'll be worth 2.8. And in 30 years, it'll be worth $5.5 million. And so you've paid 700,000 and you've got, almost $5 million worth of growth over that period of time. That's how you're going to build wealth with residential property. Now, can commercial property do the same thing? Yes, it can, depending on the type of asset you're going to buy, the timing. Timing will be very critical, the type of asset you buy, all those sorts of things. But it's very difficult to manipulate, and sometimes it can be a result of luck rather than anything else. I think the realistic approach, if you're weighing up commercial versus residential property, is to ask yourself, if I invest in these two assets, what will the average return be over the next 20 to 30 years? Because that's really what you want, is you want to benefit from that power of compounding capital growth. That's going to do all the heavy lifting. It takes time, but that's going to do all the heavy lifting. Well, if you're going to invest in a commercial property and you're going to get 7% in terms of an income yield, that's the rental income you're going to get. Well, it's, I think, unrealistic to expect any more than maybe 2% in capital growth, which gives you a total return of 9%. Maybe it'll be 3% capital growth, giving you a total return of 10%. But you're just not going to get a 7% income yield and a 7% capital growth rate on average over the next 30 years. That's a 14% return. There's not many assets out there that are going to deliver that return. I mean, some might. There might be some unicorns out there, but they're very difficult to pick, and I think it's as a result of random luck than anything else. So, Corey, given your age and stage of life, your goal is to really build as much wealth as possible. And the best way to do that is to invest in assets that are going to give you most of the return in capital growth, because obviously that's not taxed every year. You can then reinvest that growth reinvests in the asset and compounds. And if you buy the right asset and hold it for long enough, that compounding capital growth will achieve some extraordinary returns. Now, it's very simple concept to understand. It's not easy necessarily to apply and stick to. It takes a lot of patience, and it takes that foresight to make that long-term decision. So my answer to your question, Corey, would be to buy the best quality residential asset that I could afford, that one that's going to have as many attributes as possible that is going to drive the value of the underlying land in that asset over the next 30 years. And I wouldn't pay too much attention to the income necessarily. I would try to maximize as much as you possibly can the long-term capital growth rate. But great question, Corey, and thanks for submitting it. Cheers.